is multi-year. Our next topic is multi-year rate plan. So IPL discussed the merits of a multi-year rate plan and provide some of the key components of an MIRP in the written comments. So a multi-year rate plan involves a regulatory term that spans more than 1 year. We have listed in the slide these proposed components, and just to summarize, what they want to have is a term of 5 years with flexibility to propose shorter periods, introducing a multi-year rate plan as an option rather than as a requirement. It will only be filed at the last year of each multi-year rate plan to eliminate regulatory burden. Rates will either be levelized for the entire regulatory term or gradually step up over multiple years until the next multi-year rate plan term. Capital additions must be built in to the plan structure, and all projects will need approval either through advanced rate making principles or through an IRP. Capital trackers under a multi-year rate plan would change slightly, where the board could allow a utility to include transmission costs in its base rate with an annual true-up based on the actual cost incurred by the utility. As part of the multi-year rate plan, IPL is also proposing safeguards to avoid unintended consequences. So these safeguards include having a reopener in certain circumstances or when certain thresholds are met. And another safeguard that they propose is an earning sharing mechanism. They also mentioned that this multi-year rate plan may be paired with performance-based rate making or other performance incentives. So the questions that we have for this discussion is, should multi-year rate plans be proposed as an option instead of a requirement to all rate-regulated utilities and to all sectors? Do you agree with IPL's proposed 5-year term or shorter? What would be the attrition relief mechanism used specifically for IPL? Are you proposing a formula-based where rates will increase based on inflation and a productivity factor, or is it based on a forecasted cost? Would a reopener and earnings sharing mechanism, as suggested by IPL, eliminate some of the stakeholders' concerns on the multi-year rate plan? As we understand it, a reopener provides an opportunity for the revision or modification of a particular component of the plan before the end of the term. And an earnings sharing mechanism is generally designed so that utilities' extraordinary earnings are shared between the utility and the customers rather than retained entirely by the utility. Number 5, would adding language to the Iowa Code, as suggested by IPL, be sufficient to provide legislative authority to implement a multi-year rate plan? So these are some of the questions, but I'll also give the chance to IPL to say something about their plan or if something is missing in this list.
Logan Ashenfelter, IPL. I mean, I think you did a great job going through our comments, so I won't add too much other than I think on the third question, you asked specifically what our proposal was. And our, of course, would be, I think any method would be reasonable for an attrition relief mechanism, but our preferred proposal was to use, say, forecasted test years similar to what's done with the current future test year process. I think that would most closely align with cost-based rates and would ensure that customers are paying only cost-based rates during the term of the multi-year rate plan.
Thank you. Jennifer.
I think we would, I don't want to spend too much time, but we've addressed this in our comments, and we don't think multi-year rate plans are an appropriate policy to recommend in Iowa. The situations that we've looked at haven't produced benefits for customers. As comments have pointed out, multi-year rate plans remove a utility's incentives to operate and manage their operations efficiently. I think given the challenges in Iowa of rate pressures for many customer classes, that a multi-year rate plan is not at all appropriate at this time. If one would be proposed, certainly there needs to be significant protections and reduced ROE for utilities that would propose that.
Ben Flickinger with Large Energy Group. Multi-year rate plan is also a non-starter from our perspective. All of recent legislative changes in the energy sector in Iowa lately have been to the benefit of utilities. They've gotten advanced rate making, they've gotten future test years. We've seen increased riders and trackers. The emission plan and budget has been stripped out of the statute. And this would just be another one. At some point, the customers need to get some of their certainty and some of their interests dealt with as well. And so for us, this would just be another step on, the rate regulated utilities wish list. We cannot support it.
Thank you. Dave?
Yeah, this is just a follow up on both Ben's comments and Jennifer's comments. This is Dave Vogensen with Large Energy Group. Yeah, I mean, I agree that, I don't think there's a need for multi-year rate plans. For one thing, from having recurring rate cases, we don't see that as being a detriment, because customers benefit from the regulatory lag associated with recurring rate cases, and it provides the utility an incentive to better manage their costs during the interim between rate case filings. The other thing is, when you start looking at multi-years, you're adding more uncertainty into your forecasts, so it gets more difficult to determine, verifiable data, things that would be known and measurable. So it adds a great deal of uncertainty to those costs. And, kind of looking through, all the different items that, that Alliant has indicated for this, it adds a lot more complexity, as far as the rate case process and kind of going back and looking at, various adjustments or reopenings or anything like that. So I really don't see any benefit to customers from that as kind of any kind of avoidance of additional costs in the regulatory process. So I think, we really wouldn't support the multi-year rate plans.
Thank you. David?
Hey, yeah, good morning. My name is David Dismukes. I'm a consultant for the Consumer Advocate. I just want to add two more points to what Jennifer and Dave said here, particularly on two of these points. One is the issue or the presumption that somehow or another an earnings sharing mechanism could serve as a consumer protection feature. I don't think that's an appropriate characterization, or that ESMs serve as consumer protection features. I mean, to the extent you have an earnings sharing mechanisms, they're supposed to be sending signals to the utility about certain efficiency investments. I don't know that they do any good in terms of serving as a consumer protection feature, because they primarily, put the performance risk associated with, the utility's actions. They have to bear that. Consumers have to bear that if there is one of those sharing mechanisms. And if you look at the experience with multi-year rate plans around the country right now, and there's about 22 different utilities that have them, sharing, even when it's allowed, rarely happens. So if I'm a consumer and I'm looking for that kind of protection, I'm not going to get it under a multi-year rate plan. So I think it's important to keep in mind. The other issue associated with kind of the mechanics of how this works on a reopener, and this kind of cuts both ways and something we're thinking about, and it goes to what Dave just mentioned a minute ago in terms of sending signals to utilities about managing their cost. By going in and reopening a regulatory plan of this nature, you essentially start to change the terms and conditions of that plan. And most incentive regulatory plans, if you look at them, at least from a theoretic perspective, are put into place for a fixed amount of time, 3, 5 years, whatever, for both sides. It sends signals to utilities that they have opportunities over the next 3 to 5 years to make investments to generate efficiencies and savings. Or at least that's the theory that's supposed to happen. I have very big questions about whether in today's market, that in today's environment, policy environment, that happens. But nevertheless, if you look at where the theory is on incentive regulation, that's the presumption. And then on the other side for the utility, the protection is that they don't have to worry about the regulator coming in and expropriating efficiency gains that they may have made early on to go in and have that earning sharing mechanism that you talked about before that incents them to go in and do that incentive. So, I would be very cautious about that. That seems like a very bad design feature, assuming that you even wanted to do that. To do a multi-year rate plan, which Jennifer said, and obviously is not something that most consumers would support, and not things that I think consumers broadly have seen in the United States as coming back and providing strong benefits. If you look in most instances, states that have adopted these multi-year rate plans have tended to see rates that increase at rates faster than the rate of inflation, and even faster than most regional peers. And a lot of that's driven by capital investment. So I would use some caution with that.
Thank you. Dave?
Yeah, I'm with Iowa Business Energy Coalition. I think that the goals that multiple year rate plans here purport to support are better served instead of a multi-year rate plan. They're better served by having more frequent rate cases. I think you get better transparency. I think you get gradual changes, and I think you have a more frequent review of what the utility is doing. I think you're better off with more frequent rate cases as opposed to one every 20 years than to have a single rate case go several years into the future. So I would go back to comments we made earlier about more frequent rate cases. Thank you.
Thank you. Jim?
Yeah, thank you, Jim Martin Schramm, Clean Energy Districts of Iowa. I want to support the consultant for OCA. Dave, I didn't catch your last name. The fact that the states that have multi-year rate plans have higher costs to consumers is a source of great concern. The reality is the company that is proposing multi-year rate plans based on their own historical data posted on their Iowa rates website has had cost increases on an annual basis over the last 10 years that have definitely exceeded the rate of inflation. If you read the customer comments in the docket pertaining to their current rate increase requests, many of them are from low-income households, fixed-income households that are grappling with the prospect of a 13.4% increase to their current bills at a time when their wages are certainly not going up by that rate, and nor is Social Security cost of living adjustment going up anywhere close to 13.4%. So I think it's safe to say, as Dave pointed out, that this is a rate-making policy tool that would definitely benefit the utilities and their shareholders, but it's hard to see how it benefits ratepayers and their customers.
Thank you. David? Are you raising your hand?
Sorry, I forgot to lower it. No, I'm done.
Thank you. If you.
So I think the main thing is that it would require legislation, require a change in the statute. I think the current statute with the future test year and the subsequent proceeding is really, it's kind of unique to Iowa, but I think it works. And it really accomplishes some of the goals of the multi-year plan. And I just think it's not It's not, wouldn't be good policy to change the current statute.
Thank you. IPL, do you want to react to the comment you just heard?
Sure. Logan Ashenfelter, IPL. I guess maybe on Cecil's comment here on the current statute with the future test year, I think we believe that the multi-year rate plan or some adjustment to the statute to allow for multi-year rate plans provide better flexibility for more cost-based or just and reasonable rates beyond just, say, the single 12-month test year that the current this current statute and the current board rules allow for, which could provide better transparency into utility planning, better predictable rates for customers, and more gradual rate changes over a number of years instead of just all bunched in to a single test year. I guess comments about imposing regulatory lag on utilities as a measure of cost efficiency, I think is bad policy, especially for needed and necessary investments to provide safe and adequate service for customers. And not to mention that, in my opinion, wouldn't provide for just and reasonable rates, meaning that just and reasonable includes an opportunity for the utility to earn a fair and reasonable rate of return on those necessary investments.
I'll just add one more, jump over the line. And we proposed some details here in our comments. We did say there are many ways to do this. We have a model in Iowa where we do have some utilities that have alternative regulatory models. We have some utilities that are regulated with historic test years and future test years. And that just is reflective of the different situations that utilities find themselves in for a variety of situations. Nothing in this proposal would eliminate board scrutiny, review, discovery process. We spent a lot of time talking about the importance of utility planning, having visibility and transparency in planning processes. It kind of baffles me why we can't see that with kind of rate setting. So, I would just encourage stakeholders to think, more broadly of beyond sort of the immediate day that we have. And we're in a different environment than maybe we've been in the last 10 years, particularly in the electric industry, where things are changing rapidly. And there are more ways to do things than the way they've always been done.
Any other comments? Yes, we can move on to the next topic, which is kind of related to multi-year rate plan, which is performance-based regulation, performance incentives. So we've read that BCE suggests that in the long term, PBR should be considered as it provides several benefits. So these benefits include empowering regulators to reshape traditional rate-making frameworks, facilitating innovation, addressing some of the issues and disincentives inherent to traditional cost of service regulation by focusing on the utilities performance and alignment with public policy goals. It was also mentioned that the PBR framework, if well designed, should result in an incentive structure that encourages exemplary utility performance irrespective of the nature of its investment. And finally, under PBR, by providing rewards to achieving specific outcomes and objectives, it should provide the utility the opportunity to earn fair compensation based on a business model that is well aligned with the public interest. So some of the questions that we have include, would any modifications to legislation and or regulations need to be considered to facilitate PBR? or would the existing authority of the IUB be sufficient for PBR implementation? Should PBR be proposed as an option as opposed to a requirement? How long does it take to design a PBR framework? Also, are you envisioning gradual implementation of PBR where you first introduce, for example, performance incentives, then move on to a more comprehensive PBR framework, like what Minnesota is currently doing? Or should all the key PBR components be implemented right away, similar to what is done in Hawaii? Should it be implemented for all rate-regulated utilities and sectors? And lastly, which is not in the discussion question, would organizing a PBR 101 workshop to discuss the intricacies of how a PBR works be beneficial? So maybe I'll give the floor to BC to
Yeah.
answer.
Bob Rafferty, Iowa Business for Clean Energy. And the one thing we want to emphasize is we don't think this is the step to take today, but we do think it's a step to start having serious consideration and study in the next year or two. And so, following Jeff's, I thought that was a good segue. The electric industry is changing, and we need to think about doing things differently than the way we've always done it. We have to acknowledge that the profit of our electric utilities are basically, for the most part, based on how many capital assets they own. Well, the grid of the future isn't going to be about how many generation assets, distribution and transmission assets each utility has to determine what our best grid is. That'll be a component of it. But as we all know, the third-party energy resources, whether it be that generation with rooftop solar, whether that becomes the emerging amount of storage that will be owned by third parties on the grid. And three, the demand flexibility, which the potential of that continues to increase. And we have to realize that our electric utilities have a financial disincentive today to leverage those to the maximum amount. And I'm not sure it's fair for us to create that financial disincentive and then expect them to fully leverage those resources in the most efficient and most reliable way. So I think we do need to start realizing that and start having a conversation as to what can we do to start changing the paradigm so that we can better align this new grid, the incentives we need with the new grid, with the financial incentives for our utilities. And I think that, again, I think the IRP process probably needs to be on the front burner, but I think over the next year or two, we're going to be able to learn from other states as this is emerging across the country so that we can learn and take steps into this process at that point. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, David.
Yeah, just a couple of quick observations about the slide. One is this second bullet towards the top that references a well-designed PBR framework that provides, incentive structures for utilities irrespective of the nature of its investments. I don't even know what that means. I mean, and I would entirely disagree with that, particularly from a ratepayer perspective. And from a consumer advocacy perspective, I mean, they actually do need to be tied. And I think Bob's comments earlier help underscore the nature of that. If you're making investments in clean energy on a foregoing basis, or things to facilitate clean energy investment or third-party investment in clean energy, reducing emissions and doing things that are tied to what these investments are supposed to be improving, is something that needs to be directly made in any kind of PBR framework. And so, if you do something like this, all you're doing is decoupling performance and how a utility can increase their rates, which is not a good outcome if you're trying to generate positive ratepayer benefits and positive societal benefits as well. The other thing that is, I think, a little disturbing about this slide too is it just keeps referencing rewards and rewards and rewards, and it's not symmetrical in recognizing the role that penalties play in this as well. If you don't perform, there ought to be some kind of consequence associated with doing that. And I don't see that referenced here, and it needs to be considered within the context of any PBR framework to the extent that it is even going to be considered. And again, much like multi-year rate plans and some of these other forms of alternative regulation, if you, again, look and survey at what they've done around the country, they haven't resulted in net positive gains for ratepayers. They haven't resulted in efficiency gains. They haven't resulted in capital cost efficiency improvements. They haven't resulted in lower rates. They haven't resulted in anything. And so, I would raise challenges about the benefits associated with this, at least from a ratepayer perspective.
Anything else?
So, David, this is Donald with LEI, just following up on your comments just now. So do you believe any form of performance-based rate making or performance incentive mechanisms, as seen in other states, if it was reviewed for what those states may be doing correctly or incorrectly, should not be implemented at all in Iowa? You think PBR should not be implemented at all, or under right circumstances, after reviewing other states, it could be a possibility?
I don't see the role in all of this in today's environment. And I'll tell you why. Is because if you look at the theoretic underpinnings of alternative regulation as it was designed in the 80s and the 90s, a lot of this stuff revolved around either improving efficiency gains on excess capacity that was created in the energy business due to the build out of big baseload generation and thermal generation back in those days, or alternatively, during the deregulatory efforts with telecommunications and a declining cost industry that was occurring there. And if you look at the fundamental basics of what these programs were designed to do, they were designed to make efficiency improvements in either existing capacity or in how future capacity could be attained, whether it be in telecommunications or energy, it doesn't matter. And that's just not the world we live in today, right? We're not looking for creating efficiencies. We're looking for improving societal outcomes and investments that reduce our carbon footprint for the most part, right? Or improve outcomes related to other societal benefits like resiliency and other things that just don't inherently have efficiency gain opportunities to them. So like Dave Carloni mentioned earlier, I think that more frequent rate cases in an environment like that and the nature of the investments that probably better off, even if you have presumed these alternative regulatory regimes lower costs in terms of administrative and regulatory costs, that's really what you should be doing because of the qualitative nature of what we're doing in terms of what the investments are supposed to be doing.
Thanks. Jennifer Easler. I think there is a role to for the board to review utility management efficiency and how they are operating. And that's something that we could look at in terms of, is the utility, are their O&M costs, good? Are their rates good? Is their affordability good? I think there are still things that we can do within the current regulatory construct to look at how utilities are operating. And, I don't know if we're doing that as regularly as we should. And that's maybe something that could be discussed.
Thank you.
Yeah, Bob Rafferty again for a second time. And I might add, when we advocate PBR, we often, folks assume it's, we're thinking of a model that's currently being implemented in another state. I just think that's not we're sort of open-ended. We acknowledge we don't have a specific answer. But, looking at the efficiencies is important. Also looking at how do we incentivize so that the electric utilities invest in fully leveraging demand flexibility and demand response, right? How do we incentivize so they're fully leveraging the benefits of third-party generation? I think those are questions right now. They have that disincentive. How do we neutralize that? We don't necessarily say we have the answer, but we think that's such an important question for the grid of the future. We should have it on the table for a discussion in the near future. Thank you.
I have a question. Currently, are there any mechanisms that monitor the performance of the utilities? Like I know they submit reliability metrics, but other than that, are there like, customer service metrics where they're being measured or things like that? Or is that something, Jennifer, that you think that can be?
Yeah, I think we did address this in our comments, the different areas where the board does review utility performance, reliability, arrearage, disconnection numbers, the complaints, are filed with the board. But I don't know if there's a very public tracking of utility performance based on customer inquiries that the board receives, and that's maybe somewhere where we could do more to kind of monitor customer views of how utilities are doing and other measures of customer satisfaction.
So currently, is it mostly just reporting and filing?
Right.
So there's no like incentives or rewards?
It might not get looked at in a comprehensive way until you get to a rate case, but Iowa's management efficiency statute allows the board to adjust the return on equity based on management efficiency performance. So, we do try to keep track with how utilities are performing in those various measures just internally, but there isn't necessarily a regular review of that in place.
Arlene Windenberger with ISETA. I think I just wanted to kind of follow up on Bob's comments and the comments from one of the people on online. I think that the key here with what IBCE is suggesting is that we start a process to look at how utilities would be incentivized to look at things that would generate lower costs for the consumer and always and that would include how do we incentivize the utility to actually lower the asset base potentially if that's going to generate the lowest the lowest cost increases or even cost reductions for consumers in the long run. Obviously right now the straightforward way for the utility to increase profits is to increase rate base. And that's been generally the way to guarantee that they're making the necessary investments and so forth. When we had a model that required central only centralized generation. And so today obviously the utilities want to maintain profitability. That's their responsibility for shareholders to continue growing that. And so I think Bob's putting out that we need to look at ways to allow the utility to meet that requirement while leading to hopefully lower rates or the lowest rate increases for consumers as possible.
And if somebody online, sorry, forgot the name, I'll mention that on the flip side, you also have to look at the penalties, not just the incentives. So is that something that stakeholders think should be done where, utilities will be penalized if they don't, for example, achieve certain targets based, of course, on agreed performance standards? Yes.
Just on that comment, I think that probably be sort of case by case on the specific, targeted mechanism, like a reliability tool could be downside only for the utility, whereas, maybe if there was peak load reduction or adoption of time of use rates, that could be upside only to the utility if they advance certain public policy objectives.
Anybody else? Okay, I guess we can move on to our last topic for this morning, which is innovative rates and tariffs. So IBEC notes that innovative rates would provide flexibility to encourage investment in existing Iowa companies and could be utilized as a marketing tool to attract new economic growth. IBEC proposes that the innovative rates programs be entered into a voluntary basis designed to ensure that these programs will not impact customers who choose not to participate, designed to create specific authority for the board to approve tariffs and require the regulatory process overseen by the board, include an expedited review for programs that have been agreed to by consumers and utilities, but maintain the ability for intervention from other interested stakeholders. And the language in the legislation should be designed to be broad to encourage innovation between utilities and customers. Likewise, IEA suggests that the electric IOUs be required to provide market-based rates to the large customers who elect to utilize them. However, OCA recommends that prior to implementing new regulatory policies centered on tariffs, it is crucial to thoroughly examine the unique conditions associated with the adoption of innovative tariffs by utilities in other states. This analysis should encompass the terms of these innovative options as well as the advantages of tariff alternatives not currently accessible to Iowa. So our questions are, I know Cecil also mentioned in his written comments that the primary drawback to approval of market-based tariff or any other tariff allowing for innovative rates is designing them in such a way that costs are not shifted to other ratepayers. So for IBEC, can you provide an example of innovative rates that have been offered to one customer type without negatively impacting another customer type? Also, how are non-participating customers not impacted under a revenue sharing mechanism? For IEA, can you provide more information on how market-based rates would be implemented? The customers paying the market-based rates continue to pay other riders, such as transmission and energy efficiency riders, on top of the regular customer bill? Last thing.
We provided a number of examples in the record of different states. The main issues with our membership about, kind of the things they're looking for from an innovation standpoint. We've had good conversations with both IPL and Mid-Am on this. One of the main ones is this kind of concept of sleeved PPAs, really to try and meet sustainability goals of the companies, almost all of which all of our members have greenhouse gas goals. So ultimately trying to work through generation concepts with the utilities that it used to be easier for them to accept the numbers provided by the utilities to say, this is how much, back of the napkin of your electrons are renewable. As sophistication has come up in, what they need to sell to their customers, they want to take more of an ownership in some of those generation types, because they want to be able to with certainty tell their customers not only how much they're using, but how much is being generated by those. But ultimately, the goal there is doing generation and making that cost only on the person who has made it made the choice themselves to build that in partnership with the utility. The other one too, and obviously, part of that conversation and doing it with the utility is the longer term capacity-based issues within the system generally. And similarly, as we've talked about, what the grid is going to look like in the future, very large scale customers have the ability to ramp up and scale down. And I think the other big thing that we've talked about is the ability to play a part on the business side in the market of increased use or decreased use, not only from a market standpoint, but also from a capacity and grid reliance standpoint. That if there are points at which, and not all customers are the same within IBEC, we have some, as I've said here before, whether it's John Deere or Arconic, that if you gave them 25 hours in a day, they would be using the same amount of power. It's not very complicated how their usage works, but others just within their industrial processes have the ability to ramp up and scale down and can play a part in, hey, we see a load problem coming up, can you ramp down? Some would talk about that being in the EEP. What we're really talking about here is kind of an improved market-based approach to that. And we've provided examples of both of those things in the record.
Yes, Matt.
Great, thank you. Matt McKinney on behalf of the Iowa Economic Alliance. Appreciate the prompt, the question. First, we do agree without question about the principle of holding other customer classes harmless. And I believe there are different ways to do that. We put forward some concepts that would involve the utilities board itself. So for example, if a customer was interested in obtaining a market-based rate, that in advance of doing so, that customer would have to notify the utility well in advance. We suggested a year in advance. And then before, just giving notice isn't sufficient, right? There needs to be a determination as to whether or not there is going to be an impact on another customer class that can't be mitigated or avoided. And that process would be a process that would unfold before the utilities board, where the OCA, the utilities, other stakeholders could appear and make the case for whether or not there would be an impact on other customer classes, whether it be through a stranded asset or something else. And then the utilities board, like it does in many other proceedings, would make a determination as to whether or not there is or is not an impact on another customer class. If there is an impact on another customer class, based upon Acme Corp electing to go somewhere else for the generation only, then Acme Corp would have to pay the cost of that stranded cost before it would be allowed to access the market. In other words, they're paying to cover the cost that could be to another customer class. So it's a way to avoid a negative impact on another customer class. In terms of how it could be implemented, we've talked, I think, here and in our filings and amongst other stakeholders, there's different ways to do it. I know IBEC has mentioned this concept of a sleeved PPA. We do believe that there are mechanisms to work within the existing utility that we have a relationship with or relationships with, and be able to work with that utility to obtain a market-based rate and still have the business work with Alliant, or the business work with Mid-Am, and receive that market-based rate through that existing relationship. Of course, an alternative to that would be a direct purchase by the business in the marketplace. So there's different ways to do it. And we've talked about both of those. And then in terms of the questions related to riders and other items, what we have talked about is generation only. So, you know, in the event that a business were to work with Alliant, for example, the generation component of the bill would be the market-based rate. And then I think as we put in our filing, the transmission and other riders would be separate, right? And paid for by the business.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just one quick follow-up. Something I mentioned last time, Cecil and I had a nice little back and forth on this. And I would just say part of it is, especially if you think about the sleeve PPA, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. Part of it is if something's in the market, whether it's a solar project or a wind project, I don't necessarily disagree with you that, you know, we could use essentially almost like a joint filing with our utility on an advanced rate making for that project and show that the costs are only with us. I think the RSP docket, our concern is the certainty of, with the way that docket ended, we wouldn't want to find ourselves in the same boat of being told that there is an authority. So, you know, I don't necessarily disagree. I don't disagree with you at all that I think you could do that currently under advanced rate making. And we haven't seen it, but you could get creative and say, okay, this is a customer and a utility coming together to go build something together. The costs are staying with them, and then the board gets to take a look at that. There's just worry on our part. The reason that we sought a legislative solution for certainty purposes was to ensure that we didn't get to the end of the road and say, well, this isn't allowed. If that makes sense.
Yes, Jen. Thank you. You mentioned our comments that it's important prior to implementing new regulatory policies or innovative tariffs that we think about why those were adopted in other jurisdictions and think about, you know, how they compare to Iowa. And, you know, the NIPSCO slaving option in Indiana was targeted to a particular situation of threatened loss of a large amount of industrial load. And it's very limited in availability to the largest customers. I think you have to be at least 10 megawatts in size to elect that. And the Indiana Commission, that's not a retail choice option. It's still retail regulation as far as Indiana Regulatory Commission is concerned. And they were really interested in making sure that the industrial load that was threatening to leave would not evade responsibility for paying for coal plants that Indiana wanted to shut down right away. And I'm just not sure that those conditions are here in Iowa. And I'm not sure that the slaving option is really appropriate in Iowa either. We are open to innovative solutions if they are good and have solid customer protections. But we're pretty nervous about the lack of detail about that here. The Iowa Association of Electric Cooperatives submitted in their comments a report and their comments are filed October 4th, 2023, citing at the precipice the perils of utility restructuring. And I think the section on page 12 talking about special rules for special customers is pertinent and kind of highlights our concerns here. If the larger customers perceive they can get a better deal elsewhere and are permitted to flee retail regulated markets, this raises the possibility that average residential and small commercial customers would be left holding the bag for a greater share of the fixed cost of the electric grid. And that is precisely our concern.
Just to specify, I think we cited 3 different rates that we thought that market-based rates that might work in Iowa. One is the NIPSCO sleeving rate. There was another rate in Evergy, another one that was OPPD. But I think we're all cognizant of the fact that there may be concerns. And, you know, we had a lot of discussion earlier today about how the board has a lot of authority to oversee processes and ensure that, you know, things are done right. I you know, think that as we propose these, we also assume that you know, and have advocated elsewhere for a process to ensure that other customers aren't harmed. And we think the board is well equipped to make that determination. But, you know, to be clear, and as Matt said, there are many different flavors, but, you know, whether it's an hourly pricing, a day ahead, a sleeving, or if it's just access to like RTO pricing, we think those should be made available to customers who desire it. And, you know, to make it easier, and to sometimes those most sophisticated customers are the best pilot and test group to implement that. So I just want to clarify, I mean, we have cited to some very specific rates that we think would be beneficial. And as Matt said, we are cognizant of and believe the board can adequately protect other customers from any potential harm if these rates are entered into.
Thank you. Dave?
Yeah, this is Dave Charlone with IBEC. And in addition to supporting what Dustin said earlier, I want to respond to a couple of things that Jen said. First of all, I'd like to point out that the second criteria that we had in our thinking was that whatever we did, we designed it so that we do not harm other customers. That would have to be a design criteria to be established. So in terms of shifting load or burden away, I mean, that's, you know, we're right there with you. The other thing, though, I want to agree with Jen. The NIPSCO situation in Indiana, that is truly a unicorn. And they're really, I don't think there's any useful purpose for us talking about NIPSCO in this discussion here. That situation involved a utility that had a very large percentage of its load, extremely concentrated, and a very small number of very large customers, and who happened to find themselves in a situation where they were very heavily reliant upon coal assets that were rapidly being retired, some by choice, some by age and other reasons. So I think the NIPSCO case is interesting, but I don't think it really applies anywhere outside of Northwest Indiana. And I think we'd be better served to focus our efforts on copying good ideas from other people by looking not necessarily at NIPSCO, because it's just not applicable in anything like what we have in Iowa.
Yes, Jeff.
Oh, hey, Jeff, Line Energy. There's a lot of details here. I think this kind of demonstrates how the world is changing and how certain customers need different things, you know, and goes back to my earlier comments that, you know, things are changing. We need to think about how we approach things differently. And with Alliant, you know, we've been supportive of pursuing ways to enact innovative rates that meet customer needs, primarily as it influences economic development in the state. In our service territory, we do have challenges with growth and economic development, jobs, childcare, all of those things. And as we serve those communities, certainly building stronger communities is a big part of what we want to do. And having large employers that can support those communities is really important. So I don't want to get in, there's a lot of flavors of how we do this. From the utility perspective, you know, we want to meet our customers' needs. And we want to have the certainty that we can propose things that may be out of cycle with the rate case and bring those in. Certainly, we can do things in the context of rate cases, but it's all coming back to those basic principles of rate design that we all know and love, right? We want to promote economic efficiency. We want to make sure we have cost recovery. We want to make sure there's fairness and that they're reasonably implementable and not too complex and all those things. And I think there's lots of examples of what those look like, but it may be different for different customers. And some of the types of customers that we're seeing today are unlike anything we've dealt with. When you think about the scale of demand, the flexibility they may have with their load, and that just requires us to think a little bit. So very supportive of how we think about this, but for the board, what I'm thinking is more important is making sure that the board is comfortable that it has the right authority, and tools to be able to consider those types of programs when they are brought forward.
Thank you. You see, sorry.
So I'm going to try to respond to the discussion about innovative rates or different rates for the large customers. I don't really have an answer. I just know that it has some implications with regard to rate making. If you actually work through the utility and you want to you have them construct generation, I mean, that's where your real problem is. I think for me, you need to look at, is there a way to maybe not affect the utilities rates or the rate base? I mean, is there another alternative to get where you want to go, especially if you're talking about wanting to show that the energy that you're using comes from renewables? I don't know. It's just, I think when you go through the utilities, then you end up with this, what's the effect on other customers? And for me, I mean, that's a real problem, because if the utility builds it, wants to put it rate base, how do you separate it out? So I don't have an answer for that, but that's what I see is maybe there's another way to do that. That is, allows you some kind of alternative to get what you need and not affect other customers.
Yeah, go ahead, Cecil, sorry.
Yeah, and then I don't know with regard to, there's probably a way to get where IEA wants to go. I just, like I said, I haven't spent enough time thinking about it, but it's the same problem. And if what you said is you're willing then to take that to the board and then cover any of those those costs that are, but for me, that may be more than you're willing to do. So I think you need to think through it, because I don't know what those costs are or how the other factors are going to be affected. Because if you put it rate base and you build transmission and you provide the service, what do you do if some of those customers then don't take that service? So I think one of the things would be is, you only do it for new incremental new service, and you'd still be back with your regulated rates for your service that was in existence before incremental. I don't really have an answer, but that's what I think you need to look at.
Yeah, and just at the 50,000 foot level to piggyback on what you and Jeff said is the investments we're seeing not only from the large energy users that IBEC represents, but also things in my legal practice that I'm seeing come into the state, as Jeff mentioned, are unlike anything you've seen, most of which the investment are in the B's, not the M's. And a lot of times are adjacent to value add to agricultural products. They're green, and the folks that are coming in with these sorts of investments can go anywhere. And I just want to make sure that the group understands that we can either be at the front end of this, like we were with renewable energy manufacturer in the state. Either we can be at the front of this and figure out a way to incentivize the investment or somebody else will get it. That's kind of the reality that we're seeing in the market from, and I think it's fascinating. You know, not everything can be shared here, obviously, but there are some investments in the state that are landing in places that people would not anticipate around this table that are multi-billion-dollar investments in very rural communities. And, you know, I think that's a policy goal of most folks in the state, is to make sure that we have rural thriving communities. So I the 50,000 foot level, yes, I don't necessarily have an exact answer, Cecil. I just know that whether it's the IBEC members who are making quarterly and forecasting decisions on investment for their innovation, they're thinking about this, as well as what we're seeing new potential customers coming in here. And how do we incentivize them to reach the goals that they need to get to?
Yes.
Just to dovetail off what Dustin said, I think I don't know what comment it was that we felt, but I think we cited just some rates in Wisconsin where they said, you know, to really incentivize investment in some rural areas, some of these market-based rates is what I'm lumping all this stuff in, but whether it's hourly pricing or day ahead or RTO energy pricing, that if that's available in rural areas, you're going to attract development there and help spur that growth there. And that's something that's very much on our minds as well. And one reason we propose these, because we do want to see strong rural areas and investment in those parts of the state as well, not just the metro areas.
Yes, Jim.
Yeah, thank you. Jim Martin Schramm, Clean Energy Districts of Iowa. Two comments. First, I think we need to be persuaded that in fact customer protections can be achieved. We have very large, sophisticated entities advocating for these innovative rates, and it's just not, you know, we're a small organization. It's just not clear to us that residential customers will in fact be protected. So we would need to see, and we would like to have the Office of the Consumer Advocate affirm that in fact adequate protections have been in place before any innovative rates would be approved by the board. The other topic that has occurred, topic that has occurred within this conversation has been incentivizing companies that have flexible load to, in fact, you know, be more flexible with their production. And with that, on that topic, SETI is very much in support. One of the realities with distributed generation is sometimes the wind blows really hard and the sun shines really strongly. And in those incidences, often you have more power than that increased power can create problems for the grid. And so if you have customers that can absorb that power with day ahead forecasting, that's terrific. And we would definitely support that. But we're concerned about innovative rates and for large customers that could shift costs onto other ratepayer classes.
Thank you. Anybody else? Sorry.
Aurelian Windenberger with ISETA. I think, you know, the conversation here has really been with the large users. And I think, you know, from ISETA's perspective, we also want to note that, you know, in terms of, we'd like to see, you know, potential for customers to make, you know, decisions and not just the very largest customers be potentially involved in things like this. We know that, you know, a lot of residential customers may not want to participate in things like this because it's more complex, and you do need a level of what's the word? Sophistication to do some of this. But I think a lot of smaller commercial or even medium-sized commercial customers that, you know, wouldn't necessarily be above, you know, just as a round number, a 10 megawatt level, would be interested in potentially taking advantage of something like this.
I just have a quick follow-up question. So do stakeholders that propose these innovative rates or market-based rates think that it should be sort of put into legislation or the rulemaking practice, that it should be available to all customers or certain customers, or should it be evaluated more on a case-by-case basis for certain like whether certain customers have the ability to apply, or whether it should just be blanketed for all customers?
I think it should be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, just depending on what's being offered. It may not work for all customers. I hear Aurelian's point about ensuring that all customers can participate, but I think it would really just come down to the program. We view innovative rates as being for all customers, not just our largest customers. We can envision ways that type of innovative rate, innovative style tariff could be used all the way down to the residential customer. But I think it would really depend on the program and the analysis that's put into it, and anything that would be put forward by utility would have that sort of applicability or eligibility criteria associated with it.
I think if there's nothing else, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna respond to the question for anything that's akin to a market-based rate or falls under that umbrella. As I mentioned, sometimes those larger sophisticated users make for a better pilot group than just opening it up to a free-for-all. So I think, the more it can be controlled, carefully evaluated, make sure that other groups are held harmless and the like, we think that's probably the most fair way to start. If other customers with smaller user, I don't know, 5 megawatts, whatever, if they want to start working in on that, then I think there should be flexibility to allow that. But again, I don't think anybody's trying to open some free for all, for anything. I think we want to just say, look, there are some users who have a real interest in this, and depending on the type of rate could either really more affirmatively direct what they would like their utility to do, or even procure the power themselves, or they could do much more of just that kind of proxy rate that we used in our examples, that in our comments as well. And so we don't want to foreclose other users from being able to do that, but we didn't think that just opening it up to everybody was the best way to start.
Thanks. I just wanted to agree with Cecil. I think one of the best protections, if we're evaluating the innovative rate structure, including the retail choice, is that it be applicable to new load. That's a good way of making sure that there are protections in place for the customers who can't or won't choose that option. And again, I think the board is best positioned to evaluate these case-by-case decisions. And we would certainly be weighing in on whether customers are adequately protected.
Can I just ask a question? Jennifer, you said, I just want to understand, you said retail choice. Are you equating any sort of hourly pricing or day ahead or sleeving or anything like that with retail choice?
As I understand the NIPSCO option, I think if you're talking about market-based purchases, I think the new load approach is definitely something that we're more receptive to. And that was the case with Mid-American's RSP project as well. They were talking about bringing on new generation, and it was limited to new load. That's great. If you need new generation to serve new load, and that reduces the burden for other customers, that seems like a good situation.
And I was just trying to understand the phrase retail choice, and if that you thought that applied to any sort of like market-based rate or sleeving, any sort of proxy to that access, or or proxy to that rate.
My strong preference is new load for that.
Just a follow-up to Jennifer. One of the things to consider on existing though is Obviously, the proof is in the pudding, and that's really what you're expressing. But give an example of, a steel manufacturer that, their ability, well, first of all, their inputs are labor, scrap, and energy. Like those are their costs. And they can make investments. Let's say they're a Brazilian company, for instance. They can make investments anywhere around the world. And for them, they can turn that arc on and off when they choose, and what they're trying to get to is the ability to play a part in not only the cost side of the business side, but also playing a part in the arc of the load, because what they're finding is in a standard world without some of these innovations, they're not competitive. And so the worry is from an economic development perspective, and that's why, IEDA was involved in this. The worry is all of a sudden that investment shuts down and you lose 400 jobs in a rural community because they're not competitive. So that's one of the things I want you to consider as well. Is some of this is an attraction standpoint.
Right.
Some of it is a business protection standpoint to make sure that in their inputs that they're being competitive.
And one of the best ways to attract that new load is with, rates that are attractive. And I think we've been making pretty good progress in that area.
Yeah.
I would just be cautious about big changes that, upset the balance that we've achieved here.
Thank you. So you guys, thank you for sharing your views and participating in this discussion. We will take a 1 hour lunch break, so we'll meet here at 1:15 p.m.